Baby found a bear cub hidden in a movie theater seat. What Baby did next stopped the show. The old Regal Cinema sat on the corner of Maple Street like it had for 40 years, its red velvet curtains still hanging heavy despite the years of dust and dreams that had settled into their folds. That particular Saturday afternoon, the theater was half empty, the way it usually was for the 3 o'clock showing of whatever family film was playing that week. The smell of buttered popcorn drifted through the air, mixing with the faint scent of old carpet and that particular smell that only movie theaters have, something between nostalgia and anticipation. Ethan Marshall adjusted his daughter on his lap, feeling the familiar weight of her small body as she squirmed to get comfortable. Baby Lily was only 14 months old, still at that age where everything was new and worth exploring with tiny, grabbing fingers. Jessica Brooks, his wife, sat beside them, her hand resting gently on Ethan's arm as the previews flickered across the massive screen. The light from the projector cut through the darkness above their heads, creating that magical tunnel of light that always made Ethan think of childhood, of sitting in theaters just like this one with his own parents, back when the world seemed both smaller and infinitely larger at the same time. Lily wasn't interested in the screen, though. Her attention had been caught by something else entirely. She kept twisting in Ethan's lap, reaching toward the empty seat beside them, her chubby fingers opening and closing in that universal baby gesture that meant she wanted something. At first, Ethan thought she was just being fussy, the way babies sometimes are when they're supposed to sit still. He bounced her gently on his knee, making soft shushing sounds that usually calmed her down. But Lily was persistent. She leaned forward, straining against his gentle hold, making small sounds of frustration that weren't quite crying, but were heading in that direction. Jessica noticed too, leaning over to see what had captured their daughter's attention so completely. The seat beside them looked ordinary enough. Just another worn red velvet chair like all the others in the row, its cushion slightly compressed from years of moviegoers settling into its embrace. But Lily saw something they didn't. She reached again, more insistently this time, and Ethan finally gave in, shifting closer to the empty seat so she could explore whatever had caught her eye. That's when they saw it. Tucked into the crease where the seat cushion met the backrest, almost invisible in the dim light, was something that didn't belong. It wasn't trash or a forgotten toy or someone's lost phone. It was small, about the size of a tennis ball, but it seemed to shimmer slightly, as if it couldn't quite decide what color it wanted to be. Lily's fingers found it before either parent could react, and the moment her skin made contact with the object, something changed in the theater. The change was subtle at first, so subtle that Ethan thought maybe his eyes were just adjusting to the darkness differently. The screen seemed to flicker for just a moment, and the sound of the movie became slightly muffled, as if someone had thrown a blanket over the speakers. Other moviegoers didn't seem to notice, their faces still turned toward the screen, bathed in its shifting light. But Lily held the object with both hands now, and she was completely silent, completely still, in a way that was entirely unlike her usual restless energy. Jessica reached over, her maternal instinct kicking in, ready to take whatever it was away from Lily before she could put it in her mouth, as babies do with everything. But when her fingers brushed against the surface of the object, she pulled back with a small gasp. It wasn't cold or hot, wasn't rough or smooth. It was something else entirely, something that her brain couldn't quite process. It felt like touching a memory, if memories had texture. It felt like holding starlight if starlight had weight. Ethan saw his wife's reaction and reached out himself, but more carefully, just letting his fingertip graze the surface. The sensation that traveled up his arm was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was deeply, profoundly strange. It was as if the object was reading him somehow, learning who he was through that single point of contact. Lily, meanwhile, seemed perfectly content. She held the object against her chest, and as she did, it began to change. The shimmer became more pronounced, and colors started to swirl across its surface like oil on water, but more deliberate, more purposeful. The colors seemed to respond to Lily's heartbeat, pulsing gently in rhythm with her breathing. Other people in the theater remained oblivious, caught up in whatever adventure was playing out on the screen. But for Ethan and Jessica, the movie had become background noise. They watched, transfixed, as their baby daughter seemed to communicate with this impossible thing without words, without sound, just through touch and presence. The object wasn't threatening. If anything, it seemed protective, careful, as if it knew it was being held by something precious and fragile. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time had become elastic in that darkened theater, stretching and compressing in ways that didn't quite make sense. Lily eventually shifted the object to one hand, using her other to pat it gently, the way she patted their cat at home. And with each pat, the object responded with a soft pulse of light, barely visible, but definitely there. Jessica finally found her voice, whispering so quietly that Ethan had to lean in to hear her over the movie's soundtrack. She asked what they should do, whether they should tell someone, whether they should leave. But even as she asked, she knew they wouldn't. There was something about this moment, this discovery that felt private, sacred even. It belonged to them and to Lily, and bringing others into it would somehow diminish it, make it less than what it was. The object began to warm slightly, not uncomfortably, but noticeably. And as it warmed, images began to appear on its surface. Not clear images, not like photographs or movie scenes, but impressions of images, suggestions of shapes and forms that the mind could almost but not quite grasp. Ethan saw what might have been landscapes, but landscapes of where? They weren't earthly, that much was certain. There were too many moons in what might have been a sky, and the horizons curved in ways that hurt to think about too directly. Jessica saw different things, or maybe the same things from a different angle. She saw what looked like cities, but cities built from light itself, structures that existed in more dimensions than the three she was used to navigating. And Lily, what did Lily see? Her eyes were wide and unblinking, reflecting the subtle light from the object, and she was smiling. Not her usual baby smile, all gums and drool, but something quieter, more knowing. The movie on the screen reached some kind of climactic moment. The sound swelled, and the audience around them reacted with gasps and laughter. But the Marshall family existed in their own bubble of quiet wonder. The object in Lily's hand seemed to be teaching her something. Or maybe she was teaching it. It was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Ethan found himself thinking about all the times humans had looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. All the science fiction movies he'd watched in theaters just like this one. All the books he'd read late at night about first contact and alien civilizations. But none of them had imagined it would be like this. None of them had imagined it would be so quiet, so personal, so perfectly suited to the one who found it. As the movie's credits began to roll and the lights in the theater started to come up slowly, the object seemed to sense the change. It dimmed its mysterious light, and the swirling colors on its surface slowed and then stopped. To anyone glancing over, it would look like Lily was holding an unusual toy, maybe something from the gift shop. Nothing more. People began to file out of their rows, chatting about the movie, checking their phones, returning to their regular lives. But Ethan and Jessica remained seated, not quite ready to leave this moment behind. They looked at each other over Lily's head, and in that look was a complete conversation. They both understood that their lives had just changed in some fundamental way, that their daughter had been chosen for something, or had chosen something that they couldn't fully comprehend. Jessica finally stood, gathering the diaper bag and her purse while Ethan lifted Lily into his arms. The baby clutched the object tightly and neither parent tried to take it from her. As they walked up the aisle toward the exit, Ethan noticed something strange. The other moviegoers moved around them without really seeing them, as if the family existed in a slightly different space than everyone else. It wasn't that they were invisible, exactly, but more that people's attention just slid off them like water off glass. They made it to the lobby without anyone commenting on the strange object Lily carried, without anyone really looking at them at all. The teenager behind the concession counter was busy refilling the popcorn machine. The manager was discussing next week's schedule with another employee. Life went on around them, normal and mundane, while they carried something extraordinary out into the afternoon sunlight. The parking lot was bright after the darkness of the theater, and Ethan had to squint as he found their car. As he was buckling Lily into her car seat, she held the object up toward the sun, and for just a moment it seemed to drink in the light, absorbing it in a way that made the air around it shimmer like heat waves off hot asphalt. Then Lily pulled it back to her chest, satisfied with whatever exchange had just occurred. Jessica sat in the passenger seat, turned around to watch their daughter, her face a mixture of concern and wonder. She asked Ethan if he thought they should take Lily to a doctor, just to make sure she was okay, that the object wasn't harmful. But even as she said it, she knew it was unnecessary. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't hurting their daughter. If anything, Lily seemed more alert, more aware than usual, her eyes tracking movement with a focus that was unusual for a baby her age. The drive home was quiet except for Lily's occasional babbling, which sounded different now, more complex, as if she was trying out new sounds, new patterns of speech that she hadn't had access to before. The object continued to pulse gently with that soft light, synchronized with her heartbeat, and every now and then, Ethan would catch a glimpse of it in the rearview mirror and feel that same sense of vertigo he'd experienced in the theater, that feeling of standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. Their neighborhood looked exactly the same as they pulled into their driveway. The Johnsons were mowing their lawn. Mrs. Chen was walking her ancient poodle. Everything was normal, except nothing would ever be normal again. Inside their house, the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, creating long shadows across the living room floor. Ethan sat Lily down on her playmat, surrounded by her usual toys. But she showed no interest in them. She sat with the object in her lap, running her tiny fingers over its surface, and as she did, the light from it began to project outward. Not in beams or rays, but in soft, diffuse clouds of luminescence that hung in the air like three-dimensional paintings. Jessica grabbed Ethan's hand, squeezing it tightly as they watched these light forms coalesce into shapes. They saw star systems, or what looked like star systems, but with geometries that shouldn't exist, with planets that orbited in figure eights and spirals. They saw what might have been creatures, but creatures made of something other than flesh and bone, creatures of pure energy or thought or something in between. Lily laughed, a pure, delighted sound that broke the spell of silence. She reached out to touch one of the light forms and it responded to her touch, swirling and reforming into something that looked almost like a face, but a face with too many dimensions, too many angles. It seemed to look at her, and she looked back, and in that exchange was a communication that her parents could witness but not understand. The face thing made a sound, or maybe it was just the suggestion of a sound, something that bypassed the ears and went straight to the brain. It wasn't words, but it conveyed meaning nonetheless. It spoke of distances too vast to measure, of time that moved in circles instead of lines, of a loneliness that spanned eons and a joy that transcended physical form. As the sun began to set, painting the room in shades of orange and pink, the light forms gradually faded. The object in Lily's hands dimmed to a soft glow, barely visible in the growing darkness. She yawned, the universal baby signal for exhaustion, and Jessica scooped her up, carrying her to the nursery for her evening routine. But when she tried to take the object to set it aside while she changed Lily's diaper, the baby's grip tightened, and she made a sound of distress that was almost a word, almost a no. So Jessica worked around it, changing and dressing Lily for bed while she clutched the mysterious thing to her chest. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching his wife and daughter, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. They were guardians now, of something they didn't understand, protectors of a secret that might be bigger than anything humanity had ever encountered. That night, after Lily was asleep in her crib with the object glowing softly beside her like the world's strangest nightlight, Ethan and Jessica sat on their bed, trying to make sense of what had happened. They talked in whispers, even though Lily's room was down the hall, as if speaking too loudly might break whatever spell had been cast. Jessica wondered if they should tell someone, but who would believe them? And more importantly, what if telling someone put Lily in danger? What if there were people who would want to take the object, to study it, to use it for purposes that had nothing to do with the gentle exchange they'd witnessed? Ethan agreed. Whatever this was, it had chosen Lily, or Lily had chosen it, and that choice needed to be respected, protected. They talked about the images they'd seen, trying to describe them to each other, but words failed them. How do you describe a color that doesn't exist in any human language? How do you explain a feeling of connection to something so utterly alien that it shouldn't even be possible to connect with it at all? They talked until the early hours of the morning, going in circles, always coming back to the same conclusion. They would wait. They would watch. They would let Lily guide them because somehow, impossibly, their 14-month-old daughter seemed to understand this better than they did. When they finally fell asleep, it was with the bedroom door open, so they could hear if Lily needed them. But she slept peacefully through the night, the soft glow from the object painting her nursery walls with shadows that moved like living things. The next morning brought new revelations. When Jessica went to get Lily from her crib, she found the baby sitting up, which wasn't unusual, but she was sitting with a stillness that was. The object was floating about 6 inches above her outstretched palms, rotating slowly, and as it turned, it was projecting more of those impossible images onto the ceiling. But these were different from yesterday's. These looked almost like maps, or maybe blueprints, showing pathways through space that folded back on themselves, shortcuts through dimensions that human science hadn't even discovered yet. Lily was studying them with an intensity that no baby should possess, her eyes tracking patterns that Jessica couldn't even see properly, patterns that seemed to exist just outside her field of vision, always sliding away when she tried to look at them directly. When Ethan joined them, carrying his morning coffee, he nearly dropped the mug. The sight of his daughter, barely more than a year old, manipulating something that defied every law of physics he'd learned in college, was almost too much to process before caffeine. But Lily looked up at him and smiled, that same sweet baby smile she gave him every morning. And somehow that made it okay. Whatever was happening, she was still their Lily, still the baby who laughed when he made silly faces and cried when she was hungry. The object settled back into her hands, becoming solid again, tangible, and the images faded from the ceiling. It was as if Lily knew her parents needed normalcy, needed to ease into this new reality slowly. They tried to go about their usual Sunday routine. Breakfast, with Lily in her high chair, though she kept the object on the tray beside her bowl of cereal. A walk to the park, with the object tucked into the stroller beside her. But everywhere they went, subtle changes followed. Birds seemed particularly interested in Lily, landing closer than they normally would, tilting their heads as if listening to something only they could hear. Dogs would stop and stare, not aggressively, but with a kind of recognition, as if they could sense something different about her. And once, just once, Ethan could have sworn he saw another child. A boy, about 3 years old, look directly at the object and nod, as if acknowledging something, before his mother pulled him away. That afternoon, while Lily napped, Jessica did what any modern parent would do. She searched the internet. She looked for reports of strange objects found in public places, for stories of children with unusual abilities, for anything that might explain what was happening to their family. She found nothing concrete, but she did find patterns. Stories that were dismissed as hoaxes or delusions, reports of children who claimed to communicate with lights in the sky, parents who insisted their babies had been changed by encounters with something unexplainable. The stories were scattered across decades, across continents, never quite the same but always similar enough to make her wonder. Were there others like Lily? Other children who had found or been found by these objects? Ethan, meanwhile, sat in Lily's nursery, watching her sleep. The object lay beside her in the crib, glowing steadily, and he found himself talking to it. He felt slightly ridiculous, talking to what looked like a cosmic tennis ball, but he needed to say the words out loud. He told it about humanity, about their fears and hopes, about how they were trying their best to raise Lily to be kind and curious and brave. He told it that they would protect her, that they would keep this secret if that's what was needed, but that they needed to know she would be safe. The object pulsed once, brighter than usual, and Ethan took that as acknowledgement, maybe even agreement. When Lily woke from her nap, she reached for him first, then for the object, and he lifted both from the crib, feeling the weight of two responsibilities, one familiar and one impossibly strange. As the days passed, they developed a new routine that incorporated the extraordinary into the ordinary. Lily would have her breakfast while the object projected its mysterious images. She would play with her regular toys, but the object was always within reach, always glowing softly. At night, it would sing to her, or at least that's what it seemed like, producing harmonics that weren't quite sound, but had the same soothing effect as a lullaby. And slowly, Ethan and Jessica began to notice changes in their daughter beyond her interaction with the object. She was learning faster, understanding more, not in obvious ways, not in ways that would alarm anyone watching from the outside, but in subtle shifts of comprehension and awareness. She began to babble in patterns that sounded almost like language, but not any language her parents recognized. Sometimes when she was playing with the object, they would hear her making sounds that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce, harmonics and frequencies that made the air itself seem to vibrate. But she was happy. That was the most important thing. She was a happy, healthy baby who just happened to have a connection to something beyond human understanding. Jessica started keeping a journal, documenting everything they observed, though she wrote it in a code of her own devising, paranoid about anyone discovering their secret. She wrote about the day Lily seemed to predict rain hours before the clouds appeared, about the night the object's glow synchronized with the aurora borealis that shouldn't have been visible this far south, about the morning they found Lily and the object surrounded by a perfect circle of condensation on her bedroom window, a circle that contained symbols that looked almost like mathematics, but not quite. 2 weeks after the movie theater, something new happened. Lily was sitting in her playpen in the living room, while Jessica folded laundry and Ethan worked on his laptop. The object was with her as always, but it had been quiet all morning, just maintaining its usual soft glow. Then, without warning, it rose into the air, hovering at Lily's eye level. She laughed and reached for it, but it stayed just out of reach, and then it began to change. The surface became transparent, like looking through water, and inside they could see something moving. It looked like a city, but a city in miniature, a city that existed inside the object itself. Buildings that grew like crystals, vehicles that moved without touching the ground, and in the center of it all, a spire that reached up toward them, as if trying to break through from inside to outside. Lily made a sound of recognition, pointing at the tiny city with excitement. She babbled something that sounded like home, but stretched out and modulated in a way that made it mean more than just a place. It meant belonging and distance and return all at once. The city inside the object pulsed with life, and for just a moment Ethan and Jessica could see figures moving through it. Beings that weren't human, but moved with purpose and intelligence. Then Lily reached out with both hands, and the object settled back into her grasp, becoming opaque again, just a mysterious ball that happened to glow. But the image of that city stayed with her parents, raising questions they didn't know how to ask. Was that where the object came from? Was it a message? A memory? A promise? That night, after Lily was asleep, they stood together in her nursery, watching the soft rise and fall of her chest, the gentle glow of the object beside her. They didn't need to speak to know they were thinking the same thing. Their daughter had become a bridge between worlds, a translator for something humanity wasn't ready to understand yet, and they were okay with that. They would protect her, guide her as best they could, and trust that whatever this journey was, it was meant to unfold exactly as it was. The object pulsed once, as if agreeing, and in that pulse was a warmth that felt like gratitude, like recognition of their acceptance and love. The next morning brought visitors. Not unusual visitors, just their neighbors, the Johnsons, stopping by to borrow some sugar. But when Mrs. Johnson saw Lily playing with the object, she paused, her hand halfway to the sugar bowl Jessica was offering. For a moment her eyes went distant, unfocused. And then she blinked and smiled, completing the motion as if nothing had happened. But as she was leaving, she turned back and said something strange. She said that Lily was special, that she could see it, and that they should cherish this time. Then she left, and when Ethan looked out the window to watch her walk back to her house, he could have sworn he saw a soft glow coming from her pocket, just for a second, before she disappeared inside. Were there others? The thought consumed them for days. They started paying more attention to the people around them, looking for signs, for recognition, for anything that might indicate they weren't alone in this experience. And slowly, they began to see patterns. The librarian who always saved specific books for them without being asked. Books about astronomy and consciousness and the nature of reality. The grocery store clerk who would smile knowingly when Lily babbled in her strange new language. The old man at the park who would sit on the same bench every day, watching the children play, his eyes tracking something in the air that others couldn't see. It was as if there was a secret network of people who knew, who understood, who were perhaps guardians of their own impossible secrets. One evening, as they were giving Lily her bath, the object did something new. It had been sitting on the bathroom counter glowing as usual, when suddenly it projected an image onto the wall. But this wasn't one of its usual abstract patterns or alien cityscapes. This was an image of Lily herself, but older, maybe 5 or 6 years old. She was standing in a field of grass that seemed to glow with its own light, and she was holding hands with other children, all of them carrying objects similar to hers, all of them smiling. The image lasted only a few seconds before fading, but its message was clear. Lily wasn't alone. There were others like her, and someday they would find each other. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it meant Lily wouldn't have to navigate this strange new reality by herself. Terrifying because it implied a future they couldn't predict or control, a destiny that was bigger than their small family. But as they lifted Lily from the bath, wrapping her in a warm towel, she reached for the object with one hand and for them with the other, binding them all together in that moment. Whatever the future held, they would face it as a family. The object pulsed with warm light, and Lily laughed, and in that sound was all the joy and wonder of childhood, enhanced but not replaced by the cosmic mystery she carried. Days turned into weeks, and their new normal became simply normal. Ethan returned to work, though he found it hard to concentrate on spreadsheets and meetings when he knew his daughter was at home, communing with something from beyond the stars. Jessica took Lily to playgroups and baby music classes, always keeping the object hidden in the diaper bag, though Lily seemed to know when it was near, always calmer and more focused when it was close. They learned to live with the secret, to carry it without letting it weigh them down. They learned to see the wonder in it rather than the fear, to trust in Lily's connection to the object, rather than trying to understand it themselves. But the object was teaching them too, in its own way. They found themselves having dreams that felt more like memories, but memories of places they'd never been, of skies with colors that didn't exist on Earth, of music made from the resonance of crystals the size of mountains. They would wake from these dreams feeling expanded, as if their consciousness had been stretched to accommodate new possibilities. Sometimes they would share these dreams with each other and find they'd had the same one, down to the smallest detail. It was as if the object was preparing them for something, giving them glimpses of a larger universe, one small revelation at a time. 3 months after the movie theater, Lily spoke her first clear word. It wasn't mama or data or any of the usual first words. It was star, but she said it while holding the object up to the window at night, and when she did, the object flared with light that matched exactly the constellation Orion, which was visible in the clear sky. Ethan and Jessica looked at each other in amazement, then at their daughter, who was smiling as if she'd just shared the most wonderful secret. And maybe she had. Maybe she was telling them that the object was connected to the stars, that it was a piece of somewhere else that had found its way to Earth, to their family, to her. They began taking Lily outside at night more often, sitting on a blanket in the backyard while she held the object up to the sky. Each time, it would resonate with different stars, different constellations, creating patterns of light that seemed to map routes through space. Jessica started researching astronomy, learning the names of stars and their distances from Earth, trying to understand what the object was showing them. She discovered that some of the stars it resonated with most strongly weren't visible to the naked eye, weren't even known to most astronomers. They were deep space objects, detected only by the most powerful telescopes, places where the laws of physics seemed to bend and break. One night, while they were outside with Lily, their neighbor Mr. Chen came over to the fence that separated their yards. He was an elderly man, quiet and kind, who had lived in the neighborhood for as long as anyone could remember. He looked at Lily, at the object glowing in her hands, and instead of surprise or fear, his face showed recognition. He said something in Mandarin, then switched to English, telling them about his grandmother, who had told him stories of children who could speak to the stars, children who carried pieces of heaven in their hands. He said she had been one of them, long ago in China, before the world changed, before the old ways were forgotten. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small jade pendant that glowed with the same impossible light as Lily's object. The conversation that followed lasted until dawn. Mr. Seir Ita-Chen told them about a network of families around the world, connected not by blood but by these objects, these fragments of something greater. He told them that they appeared at different times, in different places, always finding children who were ready to be bridges between worlds. He told them that Lily was part of something ancient and ongoing, a slow contact between humanity and something else, something that was waiting for us to be ready. He taught them signs to look for, ways to recognize others who were part of this secret community. And before he left, he touched his pendant to Lily's object, and for a moment both flared with light that seemed to sing, harmonizing in frequencies that made the air itself rejoice. After that night, their world expanded even further. They began to notice the signs Mr. Chen had described, a certain quality of light in someone's eyes, a way of moving through space as if they were aware of dimensions others couldn't see. Children who played games that looked normal, but followed rules that bent reality just slightly. They found a pediatrician who didn't ask questions about Lily's advanced development, who simply smiled and said she was progressing beautifully. They found a daycare where 3 other children carried similar objects, where the teachers spoke in gentle tones about nurturing special gifts. They found a community they hadn't known they were looking for, a support system for the impossible. But with community came new challenges. There were those who wanted to study the objects, to understand them through science and analysis. There were those who feared them, who saw them as threats to humanity's dominance on Earth. And there were those who wanted to use them, to harness their power for purposes that had nothing to do with the gentle exchange between child and cosmos that Ethan and Jessica witnessed every day. They learned to be careful, to trust but verify, to protect Lily while still allowing her to explore her connection to the object. They learned that being guardians meant more than just keeping her safe. It meant helping her understand her role as a bridge, as a translator, as a herald of something beautiful and strange. As Lily grew, so did her abilities. By 18 months, she could make the object change shape, transforming it from a sphere to a cube to complex geometric forms that hurt to look at directly. By 20 months, she could use it to communicate with animals, not in words, but in pure emotion and intent. Birds would land on her outstretched hands, cats would follow her on walks, and once, at the zoo, an elephant reached its trunk through the bars to gently touch the object, tears streaming from its ancient eyes. Each interaction seemed to add something to the object's glow, as if it was collecting experiences, storing memories of Earth to take back to wherever it came from. The day Lily turned 2, something extraordinary happened. They were having a small party, just family and a few close friends who knew about the object. Lily was sitting in the middle of the living room, surrounded by wrapping paper and toys, but her attention was focused entirely on the object. She held it up above her head, and it began to expand, not physically, but visually, creating a sphere of light that encompassed the entire room. Everyone inside the sphere could suddenly see what Lily saw, the connections between all living things, threads of light that connected every person in the room to each other and to everything else on Earth and beyond. They could see the love between family members as actual streams of golden light, the friendship between neighbors as silver threads, the curiosity of the children as sparkling rainbow strands reaching out in all directions. The vision lasted only a moment, but it changed everyone who experienced it. They understood, in a way that went beyond words, that the object wasn't alien at all. It was a reminder of a connection that had always existed, a manifestation of the unity that underlies all existence. Lily had become not just a bridge between worlds, but a revealer of the world that already was. The world where separation was an illusion, and love was the fundamental force that held everything together. As the sphere of light contracted back into the object, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Everyone had been given a gift, a glimpse of reality from a perspective usually reserved for mystics and saints. After the party, after everyone had gone home carrying that vision with them like a secret flame, Ethan and Jessica sat with Lily in her room. She was tired from the excitement, but she wouldn't sleep without showing them one more thing. She held the object against her chest, and it began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. But then they realized it wasn't just pulsing with her heartbeat. It was pulsing with all their heartbeats, synchronized in perfect harmony. And in that moment, they understood that the object had bound them together in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. They were a family not just by blood and choice, but by something deeper, something that transcended the physical world. As Lily finally drifted off to sleep, the object continued to glow softly beside her, painting her room with gentle light that seemed to breathe with life. Ethan and Jessica stood in the doorway, watching their daughter sleep, thinking about the journey that had begun in a darkened movie theater and had led them to this moment of perfect peace. They thought about all the questions that remained unanswered, all the mysteries yet to be revealed, all the challenges and wonders that lay ahead. But they also thought about the gift they'd been given, the chance to see the universe through their daughter's eyes, to be part of something magnificent and strange, to raise a child who would help humanity take its next step toward understanding its place in the cosmos. The object pulsed once more, a gentle acknowledgement of their thoughts, and then settled into its steady glow. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance, and somewhere among them, perhaps, others were watching, waiting, preparing for the day when humanity would be ready for full contact. But for now, in this quiet house on this quiet street, a little girl slept peacefully, carrying within her the promise of that future, the bridge between what was and what could be. And her parents stood guard, protectors of a secret that wasn't really a secret at all, but a truth waiting to be discovered, a love that transcended species and space and time itself. The weeks following Lily's second birthday brought subtle but profound changes. The object seemed to be entering a new phase of its relationship with her, becoming more responsive to her emotions and thoughts. When she was happy, it would shimmer with colors that didn't have names in any human language. When she was sad, it would emit a soft humming that sounded like comfort itself. And when she was curious, which was most of the time, it would project those impossible images that seemed to be teaching her about the universe in ways her parents could only guess at. Jessica noticed that Lily had stopped watching regular children's shows on television, preferring instead to sit with the object and watch its projections, her eyes tracking movements and patterns that existed in more than 3 dimensions. One afternoon, while Ethan was working from home, and Jessica had taken Lily to the park, something unusual happened. Lily was playing in the sandbox, the object tucked safely in her mother's bag, when another child approached. The boy looked about 3 years old, with dark hair and eyes that seemed older than his years. He sat down next to Lily without saying a word and began building something in the sand. But this wasn't a normal sandcastle. It was a complex structure that spiraled upward in ways that defied gravity, the sand holding together as if bound by invisible force. Lily watched him with intense focus, then reached for her mother's bag, making the small sounds that meant she wanted the object. Jessica hesitated, looking around the park to see if anyone was watching. But the other parents were absorbed in their phones or conversations, and the boy's guardian, an elderly woman sitting on a nearby bench, simply nodded at Jessica with a knowing smile. Jessica pulled the object from the bag and handed it to Lily, who immediately held it out toward the boy. The moment his hand touched it alongside hers, both children went completely still. The air around them seemed to thicken, and for just a second, Jessica could see something flowing between them. Not light exactly, but information, pure and dense and impossible to comprehend. Then the boy smiled, said something in a language that sounded like music, and went back to building his impossible sand structure, which now glowed faintly in the afternoon sun. The elderly woman approached Jessica then, moving with a grace that belied her apparent age. She introduced herself as Mrs. Avery, though she said that wasn't her real name, just the one she used here now. She explained that her grandson, like Lily, was one of the chosen, one of the Bridges. She had been caring for him since his parents had died in an accident, though she hinted that the accident might not have been as random as it seemed. There were those, she said, who feared what these children represented, who would do anything to prevent the change that was coming. But there were also those, like her, like Jessica and Ethan, who understood that this change wasn't something to be feared, but something to be nurtured, protected, allowed to unfold in its own time. Mrs. Avery told Jessica about gatherings, secret meetings where families like theirs came together to share knowledge and support. She spoke of safe houses in cities around the world, places where the children could learn from each other without fear of discovery. She mentioned names that Jessica had heard whispered in the community Mr. Chen had introduced them to, names of scientists who had abandoned traditional research to study these phenomena, of government officials who quietly redirected investigations away from the families, of teachers who recognized the special children and helped them blend in while still nurturing their gifts. It was a network more extensive than Jessica had imagined, a hidden society dedicated to protecting and understanding these cosmic bridges. That evening, Jessica shared everything with Ethan, and together they made a decision. They would attend one of these gatherings, would take Lily to meet others like her, would step fully into this strange new world they had been skirting the edges of. The next gathering, Mrs. Avery had said, would be in 3 weeks, at a farm outside the city, disguised as a simple family reunion. They marked the date on their calendar, feeling like they were preparing for something momentous, something that would change their understanding of Lily's role in whatever was happening. As the date approached, the object seemed to sense the anticipation. It began doing things it had never done before, creating small portals in the air through which they could glimpse other places. Not alien worlds this time, but other locations on Earth where similar objects existed. They saw a girl in Tokyo whose object transformed into origami birds that flew around her room. They saw a boy in Cairo whose object drew hieroglyphs in the air that told stories of ancient connections between Earth and the stars. They saw twins in Sao Paulo who shared a single object between them, passing it back and forth in a game that seemed to bend space itself. Each glimpse lasted only seconds. But they painted a picture of a global phenomenon, a worldwide awakening that was happening quietly, gently, one child at a time. The night before the gathering, Lily had a dream that wasn't quite a dream. Ethan and Jessica knew because they shared it, all three of them existing in the same space that wasn't quite sleep but wasn't quite waking either. In this dream space, they stood in a vast library, but the books were made of light, and the words were living things that flew from page to page. Lily walked between the shelves, the object floating beside her, and everywhere she went the books opened themselves, sharing their knowledge directly with her mind. She was too young to read in the traditional sense, but in this place, reading wasn't about recognizing symbols but about absorbing truth directly. They woke simultaneously, just as dawn was breaking, and found the object hovering above Lily's bed, projecting symbols onto the ceiling that looked like a combination of mathematics and music notation. Lily was awake too, her eyes tracking the symbols as if she was reading them, understanding them in a way her parents couldn't. She reached up, and the object settled into her hands, and she spoke a single word that sounded like ready, but in a language that predated human speech. It was time for the gathering, time for Lily to meet her peers, time for the next phase of whatever journey they were on to begin. The drive to the farm took 2 hours, winding through countryside that grew progressively more remote. The GPS stopped working about halfway there, but Jessica had written directions provided by Mrs. Avery, directions that included landmarks like the tree that grows in 7 directions and the field where the corn sings. These sounded like poetry, but they were startlingly accurate. The tree did indeed split into 7 distinct trunks, and when they passed the cornfield, they could hear a subtle harmonic that seemed to come from the crops themselves. The object in Lily's lap grew brighter with each mile, as if it was coming home, or at least closer to others of its kind. The farm looked ordinary from the outside, just a collection of buildings surrounded by fields and forest. But as they parked and got out of the car, they could feel something different about the place. The air itself felt more alive, charged with possibility. Other families were arriving too, all looking like they were coming for a normal reunion, carrying potluck dishes and folding chairs. But each family had a child who carried something special, something that glowed or hummed or simply existed in a way that normal objects didn't. Some of the objects were similar to Lily's, spherical and luminous. Others were different shapes, different materials. But all of them shared that quality of being somehow more real than reality itself. They were greeted at the main house by a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Bennett, though she said her doctorate was in a field that didn't officially exist yet. She had been studying these objects and the children who carried them for 15 years, ever since her own son had found one in a meteor crater in Arizona. She welcomed each family personally, knowing their names without being told, as if the objects had already introduced them. She led them to a large barn that had been converted into a meeting space, with comfortable seating arranged in a circle, and toys scattered on rugs for the younger children. As families settled in, the children naturally gravitated toward each other, their objects beginning to resonate in harmony. The sound they created together was unlike anything Ethan and Jessica had ever heard. A chord that seemed to include frequencies beyond human hearing, but which could be felt in the bones, in the soul. Lily toddled over to a group of children her age, and without any verbal communication, they began to play a game that involved passing their objects back and forth, each exchange creating small bursts of light that hung in the air like fireworks frozen in time. Dr. Bennett began to speak, addressing the parents while the children played. She talked about the history of these objects, how they had been appearing throughout human history but were becoming more common now, in this generation. She showed them cave paintings that depicted similar objects, ancient texts that described children who could speak to the stars, archaeological evidence of technologies that shouldn't have existed in their time periods. She explained her theory that humanity was being prepared for something, that these children were the vanguard of a new phase of human evolution, not biological but consciousness-based. She spoke about the challenges they faced, the organizations that would seek to exploit or suppress what was happening. But she also spoke about hope, about the potential for humanity to join a larger community of consciousness that spanned the universe. The objects, she believed, were teaching tools, communication devices, and protection all in one. They were adapting their human carriers for contact with intelligences that existed in different dimensions, different states of being. The children weren't being changed into something alien. They were being helped to access abilities that had always been dormant in human DNA, waiting for the right catalyst to activate them. As she spoke, the children's play grew more complex. They had arranged their objects in a pattern on the floor, and above the pattern, a hologram was forming. It showed Earth, but not as any satellite had ever captured it. This Earth was alive with energy, ley lines of light connecting sacred sites, population centers pulsing with collective consciousness, the oceans singing with whale song that was also somehow mathematical code. The children watched this display with calm understanding, as if they were seeing the world as it truly was for the first time, or perhaps remembering something they had always known. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the older children, a girl of perhaps 8, stood up and began to speak. But she wasn't speaking in English or any other Earth language. She was speaking in the harmonics that the objects used, her voice somehow producing multiple tones simultaneously. As she spoke, or sang, or whatever the proper term was for what she was doing, the other children joined in, each adding their voice to create a chorus that made the barn itself seem to dissolve. For a moment, everyone present could see beyond the physical structure, could see the farm as it existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They saw beings of light moving through the space, tending to energies instead of crops, nurturing possibilities instead of plants. The vision lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. When it ended, when the barn solidified around them again, there was a long moment of silence. Then one of the parents started crying. Not from sadness, but from the sheer beauty of what they had witnessed. Others joined them, and soon the entire gathering had become something between a support group and a celebration. People sharing their fears and hopes, their experiences and questions. The children continued to play, seemingly unaware of the emotional impact their demonstration had had on the adults, or perhaps simply accepting it as natural, as the way things were supposed to be. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed especially vivid, families began to share meals they had brought. But this wasn't just about food. As people ate together, the objects seemed to create connections between them, temporary telepathic links that allowed for communication beyond words. Ethan found himself understanding the fears of a mother from India without her speaking, feeling the joy of a father from Sweden as he watched his son play. Jessica experienced the memories of a grandmother from Japan who had been waiting 60 years for this moment, who had carried the secret of her own childhood encounter with an object until now. Dr. Bennett moved through the gathering, checking on each family, answering questions, providing reassurance. She gave Ethan and Jessica a small device that looked like an ordinary smartphone but which she explained was connected to a secure network used by the families. Through it, they could communicate safely, share experiences, call for help if needed. She also gave them a journal, its pages blank but somehow expectant, waiting to be filled with observations about Lily's development. She explained that each child's journey was unique, but by sharing their experiences they could begin to understand the larger pattern, the greater purpose behind what was happening. As darkness fell, the objects began to glow more brightly, and the children gathered them together in the center of the barn. What happened next was pure magic, or science so advanced it was indistinguishable from magic. The objects rose into the air, arranging themselves into a complex three-dimensional mandala that rotated slowly, each object maintaining its position relative to the others despite the movement. From this formation, beams of light emerged, not harsh or blinding, but soft and welcoming, creating a holographic display that filled the entire barn. The display showed the history of the universe, but not as astronomers understood it. This was the history of consciousness, showing how awareness had emerged from the void, how it had spread from star to star, how it had taken countless forms on countless worlds. It showed Earth's place in this vast web of consciousness, not as an isolated island, but as a cherished node in an infinite network. It showed the future too, or possible futures, paths that humanity might take depending on the choices made in the coming years. Some paths led to isolation and stagnation, others to transcendence and connection. And in all the positive futures, children like Lily were there, building bridges, translating between worlds, helping humanity find its place in the cosmic community. The display lasted for an hour, though time seemed to stretch and compress during it. When it finally faded and the object settled back into the children's hands, everyone sat in stunned silence. Then, slowly, people began to talk, to process what they had seen. Some were frightened by the responsibility it implied. Others were exhilarated by the possibilities it presented. But all of them understood that they were part of something unprecedented in human history, something that would require courage and faith and a willingness to let go of old certainties. As families began to leave, saying goodbyes that felt more like until next time than farewell, Lily fell asleep in Jessica's arms, her object clutched to her chest. The drive home was quiet, both parents lost in thought about what they had witnessed. The familiar streets of their neighborhood looked different now, overlaid with the memory of seeing them from a cosmic perspective. Their house felt both smaller and larger. A tiny point in an infinite universe, but also a crucial node in the network of consciousness that connected all things. They put Lily to bed, the object glowing softly beside her, and then sat together on their couch, trying to process the day's revelations. They talked about the other families they had met, the stories they had heard, the visions they had shared. They talked about the future, about what it might mean for Lily to grow up as one of these bridge children. They talked about their own roles, how they could best support her while still protecting her from those who might not understand or might seek to exploit her gifts. They talked until the early hours of the morning, and when they finally went to bed, they found that their dreams were filled with stars that sang and geometries that danced, and a sense of connection that made the vast distances of space seem like nothing at all. The next morning brought a new understanding of their daily life. Everything looked the same on the surface, but they could see the deeper patterns now, the connections that had always been there, but which they hadn't been able to perceive. They saw how the birds that gathered in their yard were part of a communication network that spanned the globe. They noticed how certain trees seemed to lean toward their house, as if drawn by the object's presence. They observed how the very air around Lily seemed to shimmer sometimes, as if reality was slightly more flexible in her presence. Sue, chapters of mentioned part, has completed. As weeks turned into months, life settled into a new rhythm. Lily continued to grow and develop, her connection to the object deepening with each passing day. She began to speak more, mixing English with the harmonic language of the objects, creating sentences that conveyed meaning on multiple levels simultaneously. She would tell Jessica about her dreams. But these weren't normal toddler dreams of puppies and ice cream. She dreamed of swimming through seas of liquid light, of dancing with beings made of pure mathematics, of building cities out of music and time. And sometimes, when she woke from these dreams, the object would be displaying scenes that matched her descriptions perfectly, as if it had been dreaming with her. The secret network of families became their extended family, a support system unlike anything they had imagined. They attended more gatherings, each one revealing new aspects of what was happening. They learned about children in remote villages who were using their objects to purify water and enhance crop growth. They heard about teenagers who were solving mathematical theorems that had puzzled academics for decades, downloading the knowledge directly from their objects. They met young adults who had grown up with objects and were now working in various fields, quietly advancing human knowledge in ways that wouldn't be recognized for years to come. But there were also challenges, moments of doubt and fear. There were nights when the object would pulse with urgent light, and Lily would wake crying about dangers she couldn't articulate. There were times when strangers would stare at them in public, their eyes lingering too long on the bag where they kept the object when they were out. There were news reports about unexplained phenomena that sounded suspiciously similar to what they experienced daily, reports that were quickly buried or explained away. They learned to be vigilant without being paranoid, protective without being isolating. One day, when Lily was nearly 3, she did something that changed everything. She was sitting in the backyard playing with the object as usual, when she suddenly stood up and walked to the center of the yard. She held the object above her head and spoke a single word in the harmonic language. The object exploded with light, not violent but expansive, creating a dome of energy that enclosed the entire property. Within this dome, time seemed to slow down. Ethan and Jessica could see every detail of every leaf on every tree, could hear the heartbeat of every small creature in the garden, could feel the rotation of the earth itself. But more than that, they could feel presence. Not one presence, but many. Consciousness from beyond earth touching their minds gently, carefully, like a parent checking on a sleeping child. These beings didn't communicate in words but in pure understanding. They conveyed that they had been watching, waiting, ensuring that humanity was ready for the next step. They expressed something that might have been pride or joy at seeing how the bridge children were developing, how the human families were adapting. They promised that when the time was right, when enough bridges had been built, there would be a meeting, not just of minds, but of worlds. The dome of light collapsed gently, like a soap bubble popping in reverse, and Lily sat down hard on the grass, giggling as if she had just done something mischievous. The object settled into her lap, its glow subdued but satisfied. Ethan and Jessica rushed to her, checking that she was okay, but she was more than okay. She was radiant, her eyes bright with knowledge that no 3-year-old should possess, but which seemed perfectly natural for her. She looked up at them and said in perfect English, "They're coming to visit, not yet, but soon. We need to be ready." That night, as they tucked Lily into bed, she told them more about what she had learned during the contact. The beings, she said, were like gardeners, but instead of plants, they tended to consciousness itself. They had been seeding worlds throughout the universe with the potential for awareness, and Earth was one of their most promising gardens. The objects were seeds of a sort, catalysts for the next phase of human evolution. But this evolution wasn't being imposed from outside, it was being awakened from within. Humans had always had the potential for cosmic consciousness. They just needed help remembering how to access it. She explained, in her mixture of toddler speak and cosmic wisdom, that the bridge children were the first wave, but there would be others. Eventually, all humans would have the ability to connect with the greater consciousness that permeated the universe. But it had to happen slowly, gently, to avoid the fear and violence that often accompanied rapid change. The children were teaching the adults, showing them that the unknown didn't have to be frightening, that difference didn't mean danger, that connection across vast distances and different forms of life was not only possible but natural. As she drifted off to sleep, the object pulsing gently beside her, she murmured something about a school, a place where the bridge children could learn together, where they could prepare for their role in the coming changes. Ethan and Jessica looked at each other, understanding that their daughter was outlining her own future. A future they could barely imagine, but which they would help her achieve however they could. They stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her sleep, thinking about the journey that had brought them here and the journey that still lay ahead. The next morning brought a call from Dr. Bennett. She had felt the contact too, as had all the families in the network. Something had shifted, she said. The timeline was accelerating. She was working on establishing the school Lily had mentioned, a place that would look like a normal private school from the outside, but would be so much more. She asked if Ethan and Jessica would consider relocating, joining other families in creating a community where the children could grow and learn together. It was a big decision, one that would require leaving behind their current lives, but as they looked at Lily, playing with her object and casually bending the laws of physics, they knew their old life was already gone. They spent weeks discussing it, weighing the pros and cons, but in the end, the decision was simple. Lily needed to be with others like her, needed teachers who understood what she was becoming, needed the protection that a community could provide. So they sold their house, said goodbye to neighbors who had become friends, and moved to a small town in the mountains where Dr. Bennett was establishing what she called the Institute for Conscious Evolution. It looked like any other progressive school, with solar panels and gardens and children playing on innovative playground equipment. But the equipment was designed using principles derived from the objects, and the gardens grew plants that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and the children playing were casually doing things that would have been called miracles in any other context. Lily thrived in this new environment. She made friends immediately, children who understood her mixed language, who could see the same multidimensional patterns she saw, who shared her dreams of swimming through cosmic seas. Her teachers were remarkable individuals, some who had grown up with objects themselves, others who had dedicated their lives to understanding this phenomenon. They taught traditional subjects, but through the lens of cosmic consciousness. Math became a study of the patterns that underlay reality. Science became an exploration of consciousness as a fundamental force. Art became a way of expressing truths that couldn't be captured in words. Ethan found work with a tech company that was secretly incorporating principles learned from the objects into new technologies. Jessica began working with Dr. Bennett, documenting the children's development, looking for patterns that might help them better understand what was happening. They made friends with other parents who understood the unique challenges and joys of raising a bridge child. They found a new normal that was anything but normal, a life that was simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary. As Lily's 4th birthday approached, she began talking about a gathering, but not like the ones they had attended before. This one, she said, would be different. This one would include them, the consciousness from beyond Earth. She drew pictures of it with crayons, images that looked like children's drawings, but contained mathematical principles that made Ethan's head spin when he tried to understand them. She hummed melodies that the object harmonized with, creating songs that seemed to reshape the air itself. She was preparing for something, and through her they were all preparing. The night before her birthday, Lily couldn't sleep. She sat in her bed with the object in her lap, both of them glowing with anticipation. She called her parents in, not because she was scared, but because she wanted to share something with them. She held out the object, and when they touched it, they were suddenly elsewhere. Not physically, their bodies remained in Lily's room, but their consciousness was transported to a place that wasn't quite a place, a meeting ground between dimensions. There were others there, all the bridge children from around the world. Their consciousness gathered in this space that existed outside normal reality. And there were the others, the beings who had sent the objects, who had been waiting and watching. They weren't alien in the traditional sense. They were more like older siblings, consciousness that had evolved beyond the need for physical form, but remembered what it was like to be embodied, to be young, to be discovering the universe for the first time. They welcomed the children with something that felt like love, but was deeper, more fundamental, a recognition of kinship that transcended species or form. The gathering lasted all night in Earth time, but felt like moments or eons in that space beyond space. Information was exchanged, not through words, but through direct transfer of understanding. The children learned about their roles in the coming transformation, not as leaders or saviors, but as translators, helping humanity understand that it was part of a larger family, that it wasn't alone, that it never had been. The beings shared their own history, how they had once been like humans, bound to a single world, limited to a single perspective, until they had learned to expand, to connect, to become part of the cosmic consciousness that linked all aware beings. When dawn broke and consciousness returned fully to their bodies, Lily was different. Not changed exactly, but more fully herself, as if she had finally understood completely who and what she was. The object had changed too, its glow steadier, deeper, more integrated with Lily's own energy field. She looked at her parents with eyes that held the wisdom of ages, but also the innocence of a 4-year-old who was excited about her birthday party. She told them that the waiting time was almost over, that soon, very soon, the bridge would be complete enough for others to cross. Her birthday party that afternoon was a joyous affair, with children from the Institute and their families gathering to celebrate. But it was also a gathering of consciousness, the objects carried by the children creating a network of light that could be felt if not seen. As Lily blew out her candles, the objects pulsed in unison, and for just a moment, everyone present could feel it. The approach of something wonderful, the nearness of a reunion that had been millennia in the making, the imminent end of humanity's cosmic loneliness. That night, as Ethan and Jessica tucked Lily into bed, she told them she loved them. But she said it in the harmonic language, and somehow it meant more than the English words ever could. It meant love, not just as emotion, but as the fundamental force that connected all conscious beings. It meant gratitude for their protection and guidance. It meant promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. The object pulsed once with warm light, agreeing, acknowledging, blessing, as they stood in her doorway, watching her drift off to sleep. Ethan and Jessica reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that moment in the movie theater to this moment in a bedroom in a mountain town, their lives had been transformed in ways they never could have imagined. They had become part of something larger than themselves, guardians of a secret that was gradually becoming known, witnesses to the next step in human evolution. And through it all, they had remained a family, bound by love and wonder, and the shared experience of the impossible becoming possible. The object glowed softly through the night, a nightlight unlike any other, a beacon calling to the stars, a promise that Earth was ready, that humanity was ready, that the bridges built by children like Lily were strong enough to bear the weight of first contact. And in her dreams, Lily danced with beings of light, swam through seas of consciousness, built cities of pure thought, preparing for the day when dream and reality would merge, when the isolation of Earth would end, when humanity would take its place in the cosmic community that had always been waiting, patient and loving, for this moment to arrive. As the seasons changed and Lily grew, the world around them began to shift in subtle ways. News reports spoke of unexplained phenomena with increasing frequency, though always with rational explanations attached. Scientists announced discoveries that seemed to leap ahead of current understanding. Children around the world began displaying capabilities that challenged conventional understanding of human potential. The bridge children were no longer alone in their strangeness. They were simply the first drops of a coming rain, the herald of a transformation that could no longer be contained or hidden. Dr. Bennett's Institute grew, accepting more children, expanding its facilities, becoming a model for similar schools opening quietly around the world. The network of families strengthened, creating support systems that transcended national boundaries, cultural differences, linguistic barriers. The objects continued to teach, to protect, to prepare, each one adapting to its carrier's unique needs and capabilities. And through it all, the children grew, learned, played, living lives that were simultaneously normal and miraculous. One evening, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Lily stood at her bedroom window, the object floating beside her, both of them gazing at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She spoke, not to her parents, but to the universe itself, her voice carrying harmonics that rippled through dimensions. She said that the bridge was nearly complete, that the time of separation was ending, that soon, so very soon, humanity would understand its true place in the cosmos. The object pulsed in agreement, its light visible through the window to anyone who happened to look up, a star that had come to Earth, a promise of connection, a beacon of hope. Ethan and Jessica stood behind their daughter, their hands intertwined, watching as she communicated with forces beyond their full understanding, but not beyond their love. They had learned to live with mystery, to embrace the unknown, to trust in the process that was unfolding through their child. They had become bridges themselves, spanning the gap between the ordinary world they had known and the extraordinary world that was emerging. And in that spanning, they had found purpose, meaning, a sense of being part of something infinitely larger than themselves. The object suddenly flared with brilliant light, and for a moment, the room was filled with presence, not threatening but welcoming, not alien but family. Lily turned to her parents, her face radiant with joy, and spoke words that would stay with them forever. She said that love was the only universal language, that consciousness was the only true currency, that connection was the only real purpose. She said that everything else, all the fear and division and isolation that plagued humanity, was just forgetting, and that the objects, the bridge children, the coming contact, were all just ways of helping humanity remember what it had always known but had temporarily forgotten. As the light faded and the room returned to normal, Lily yawned and climbed into bed, suddenly just a tired 4-year-old again. But the object remained active, projecting soft images onto the ceiling, scenes of possible futures where humans and beings from other worlds worked together, played together, learned together. Where children like Lily were not unusual but typical, where the boundaries between self and other, here and there, us and them, had dissolved into a unity that preserved diversity while celebrating connection, where Earth was not an isolated island in the cosmic dark, but a valued member of a galactic, perhaps universal community of consciousness. Ethan and Jessica kissed their daughter goodnight and left her room, but they didn't go far. They sat in the hallway outside her door, as they often did, listening to the soft harmonics of the object's lullaby, feeling the presence of something vast and loving watching over their child, over all the bridge children, over Earth itself. They held each other and whispered about the future, about the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, about their role in this unfolding story. They made plans and discarded them, knowing that the future was too large, too strange, too wonderful to be captured in plans. As midnight approached, something shifted in the air. The object's glow intensified, and similar glows could be seen from other houses where bridge children slept. The mountains themselves seemed to pulse with subtle light, as if the earth was responding to some cosmic signal. Ethan and Jessica stood and went to the window, looking out at a world that was transforming before their eyes. Not dramatically, not violently, but gently, like a flower opening to the sun, like a child waking from a long sleep, like humanity remembering its true nature. In her room, Lily sat up, fully awake, the object hovering before her. She wasn't alone. The consciousness of all the bridge children had gathered again in that space beyond space. They were making a final preparation, setting the stage for what would come next. Together, they reached out across the cosmos, sending a signal that said Earth was ready, humanity was ready, the bridges were built and strong. And from across impossible distances, through dimensions that human science hadn't yet discovered, came an answer. We're coming. Not to invade, not to control, but to reunite. Welcome back to the family you never really left. The signal faded. The children returned to their bodies, and Lily lay back down, clutching the object to her chest. But something had changed, fundamentally and irrevocably. The waiting was over. The preparation was complete. What came next would challenge every assumption humanity had about its place in the universe, but it would also fulfill the deepest longing of the human heart, the longing for connection, for meaning, for confirmation that we are not alone, have never been alone, will never be alone again. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Ethan and Jessica finally returned to their own bed. Exhausted, but exhilarated. They knew that when they woke, the world would be different, that the secret they had been keeping would soon be secret no more, that their daughter and all the bridge children would soon step into roles that would reshape human civilization. But for now, in these last quiet moments before the transformation became undeniable, they held each other and remembered that day in the movie theater when their ordinary lives had become extraordinary, when a baby's curiosity had opened a door to the cosmos. The object in Lily's room pulsed one final time, sending out a wave of energy that rippled across the earth, touching every living thing, planting seeds of awareness that would soon bloom into understanding. And in her sleep, Lily smiled, dreaming of the day when all children would carry pieces of starlight, when all humans would be bridges, when Earth would sing in harmony with the cosmos. That day was coming, sooner than anyone expected, gentler than anyone feared, more wonderful than anyone had dared to hope. The story that had begun with a baby finding something unusual in a movie theater seat was about to become the story of humanity, finding its place in a universe teeming with consciousness, with love, with infinite possibilities for connection and growth. The bridge was built. The path was clear. The next chapter of human history was about to begin, and it would be written not in words but in light, not in isolation but in communion, not in fear but in wonder. The baby who had found a bear cub that wasn't a bear cub at all had indeed stopped the show, but only to begin a far greater performance, one in which all of humanity would play a part, one in which the audience and the actors were the same, one in which the story never really ended, but simply transformed, evolved, transcended, becoming something new with each telling, each generation, each moment of conscious connection between Earth and the stars.